The next item of business, I call Jamie Hepburn for a point of order.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I promise not to detain colleagues for too long. I know we will be busy this evening. Presiding Officer, I thank you for allowing me to make this point of order. And as you are aware, we obviously spoke yesterday and you said it would be okay for me to do so. I rise to refer to my conduct last week, which has precipitated me standing down from ministerial office. I have apologised directly to Mr Ross. I reiterate that apology now. I've apologised to the First Minister, and yesterday, of course, I apologised to you, Presiding Officer. I think it is appropriate, though, that I also apologise to this chamber and to all colleagues. For those of us who love this institution, it is important that we all act in a manner that does not bring it into disrepute. I regret that my normal conduct, and people would recognise I would not normally conduct myself in such a fashion. I regret that lapse last week, and I wish to apologise to all colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Hepburn. I note your remarks, and members know the responsibilities that are placed on all of us, and I expect all members to take those obligations under the Code of Conduct seriously, both within and out with the Chamber. We will move on to the next item of business, which is consideration of Business Motion 19021 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau on changes to the business programme. Any member who wishes to speak to the motion should press their request to speak button now. And I call on Graham Day to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. No member has asked to speak to the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 19021 be agreed. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is topical questions. At question number 1, I call Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to reports that more than 1,000 Scottish charities are closing every year.
Cabinet Secretary Shirley-Anne Somerville.
The third sector plays a vital role to support communities across Scotland, and we recognise the pressures they are facing. We are committed to fairer funding and have launched a multi-year funding pilot worth £130 million over 25 to 27, building on areas where multi-year funding was already established. All arms of government have responsibility to ensure sustainability of the sector. We continue to work constructively with the SCVO within the Scottish Government, and we will carefully consider their proposals. We also continue to press the UK Government to reconsider their decision to increase employers' national insurance contributions for the third sector and for recompense following these changes.
Alexander Stewart.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. State funding has gone down by 5% since 2021, which has cost about £177 million. The rise in employers' national insurance contribution has cost the sector £78 million. At a time where demand for support for the voluntary sector is rising, it is unsustainable to expect the voluntary sector to find the shortfall. Taking this essential sector for granted will be devastating for families and communities across Scotland. So will the Government commit to providing the funding necessary to support these charities, which are lifelines for families and communities across the whole of Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I would agree with some of the points that Alexander Stewart said there in terms of the important work that the third sector does right across Scotland and indeed in all our communities over a variety of issues. That's exactly why I held a round table with third sector representatives during the summer, so we could talk about the challenges that they face, both in the short, medium and long term, and work together to devise solutions. Some of those will be in the gift of the Scottish Government, others will lie elsewhere. But as I said at that round table, I'm very committed to working with the SCVO and others from the third sector to find a way through the challenges that they have. Alexander Stewart's quite right to point out to the fact that for many in the third sector, demand is increasing for their services. I think this once again points to the important role that they play, and that's exactly why the Scottish Government is determined to work with them to ensure that we can support the third sector in everything that they do. Alexander Stewart.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for the response. In a joint letter from 240 charities, including the Scottish Hunting Association, it does not just highlight why there are so many alarming closures, but it also sets out some solutions: an immediate cash injection, a medium-term recovery plan, and a commitment for multi-year funding with uplifts that reflect inflation. Therefore, will the Cabinet Secretary commit to implementing these measures, or do they accept that these organisations will otherwise face an uncertain future?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, that's exactly why I had one of the many discussions I have, but the most recent one was that round table that I've already mentioned, so that we could talk about what the government could do. Alexander Stewart's also very well aware. I think we met just last week to talk about the importance of the work that I undertake on behalf of the government on child poverty, but also on the third sector, and discussed with him the importance of the process that we're about to embark on very soon on our next Scottish Government budget. He makes a number of asks there for the Scottish Government to deliver higher funding for the third sector, and I look forward to working with him when he brings forward those costed proposals for, I would presume, not just my portfolio but for other portfolios, given the third sector covers every part of government and therefore every portfolio. With that costed proposal, which I'm sure will arrive on my desk during the budgetary discussions, I look forward to getting into that detail with him.
Thank you. Christine Graham.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, isn't the real story here one of the increase in national insurance contributions for employers? And I declare an interest here because, for example, this will cost the SSPCA £400,000 extra every year simply because of that increase. Isn't that the real story why charities are in such difficulties?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Christine Graham is absolutely right to point out about the particular challenge that they have when they were, quite frankly, blindsided by the UK Government only a matter of days after many from the third sector were invited to Downing Street to discuss a covenant and an agreement with the third sector. They then found out about the increase in employer national insurance contributions, which my understanding is that the impact of that will be around £75 million for the third sector in Scotland, and Christine Graham mentions the Scottish SPA as part of that. They are also suffering those types of challenges. That's exactly why I said in my first answer, we, of course, within the Scottish Government will do what we can and work with the third sector. Other arms of government must do the same and must respond to the, I think, quite right criticism they've received for the very, very difficult circumstances that they have placed the third sector under.
Question number 2, Willie Rennie.
To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the recommendation made by the Commission on School Reform Report Behaviour in Schools that teachers should be able to suspend or exclude pupils who exhibit persistent behaviour issues.
Cabinet Secretary Jenny Gilruth.
We all want our schools to be safe places for children and young people to learn and for our staff to work in. Both our national guidance on preventing and managing exclusions and our recent guidance on consequences are clear that exclusion is an option that is open to schools where that is appropriate. Exclusion should be the last resort, and when used, it should be as a proportionate response where there is no appropriate alternative. Exclusion alone is unlikely to lead to behavioural change, and therefore the space provided by exclusions should be used to develop a plan to provide appropriate support to address the child's behaviour.
Willie Rennie.
So I agree with much of that, because it must be clear that schools do have the right to exclude or suspend pupils. But councils also have a responsibility to provide support and education for those pupils when they are out of school. But the big question is the Minister confident that that is actually happening in local authorities and in schools?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank the member for his question. He's absolutely correct to say, of course, that schools and teachers in particular have the right and the power to exclude or to suspend children and young people in terms of behaviour. And, of course, we've been working very closely with COSLA in relation to our National Action Plan on Behaviour and Relationship. That plan is jointly owned between Scottish Government and local government, and that is imperative because, of course, local government, as the report sets out, hold the statutory responsibility for the delivery of education. I've been really clear in my engagement with local government on this, but not only that, Councillor Tony Buchanan and I have written to all directors of education earlier this year to ensure that Action Plan is making a difference at the chalk face, and the points that Mr Rennie quite rightly has raised this afternoon are being addressed by local government.
Willie Rennie.
But the Commission for School Reform have been heavily critical of that very guidance that the Minister has just set out. They state in the report that it's not reassured teachers, it's provoked widespread criticism and is fundamentally misguided. Now, the Cabinet Secretary often seeks the advice of the Commission for School Reform. So will she take their advice today and issue new national guidance which clearly asserts the right of every young person to an education which is not disrupted by others and recognises that dealing effectively and quickly with bad behaviour requires sanctions?
Cabinet Secretary.
The member for his question. I do often engage with the Commission on School Reform. I listen to them intently, and I'm more than happy to give a commitment today that I will continue to do that on this particular issue. But in relation to the guidance itself, I just would remind Mr Rennie that this guidance didn't come from me as Cabinet Secretary nor from officials. It came from the teaching profession. It was an ask from the teaching profession on the back of the Behaviour in Scotland Schools research. We responded to that ask with very clear national guidance, and involved in the commissioning of that research that's published, rather the guidance, has been the EIS, the NASUWT, School Leaders Scotland, educational psychologists and local authorities additionally. So I would ask Mr Rennie to reflect on the fact that this guidance has come from the profession. It has been written by the experts in our classrooms, but of course I'm more than happy to listen to the Commission on a range of different educational issues. They cite in their report a number of things. It's a relatively short report, I think 7 or 8 pages in length, but they talk, for example, about support for teachers not being as strong as it has been in the past. That's actually an international trend that we've seen across Europe and across the world post-pandemic, whereby the role of the teaching profession has diminished somewhat, and it's really important that we work with our teaching trade unions and with others, including the Commission, on how we can help to restore that relationship, particularly between school and home. And the report, of course, goes on to talk about some of the challenge in that regard. But I do give that commitment to Mr Rennie that I will engage with the Commission on the substantive points in their report.
George Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Children and young people's behaviour does not become unacceptable overnight. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that things such as wider societal impact, like poverty and deprivation, doesn't help when it comes to behaviour in the classroom and can create many of these challenges? And can the Cabinet Secretary provide further details on the continued work to narrow the poverty-related attainment gap and how this contributes to pupils having a more positive classroom experience?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I thank Mr Adam for his question. I note that the report makes quite rightly a number of references to the pandemic in terms of its impact on behaviour and relationships, but there does seem to be an omission in relation to the impact of poverty. And we know that austerity has harmed the outcomes of some of Scotland's most vulnerable families, and that includes children. So I've spoken previously, Presiding Officer, about the normalisation of food banks and clothing banks in our schools, and our teachers are stepping up to meet what is now a societal need, but they should not have to do that, which is one of the reasons I've commissioned independent advice on school funding, which is being led by a very experienced former head teacher, John Wilson, and he's going to look at, for example, what comes next after the Scottish Attainment Challenge and Pupil Equity Fund. So I would encourage all members to engage in Mr Wilson's review and to contribute their ideas accordingly.
Stephen Kerr.
Let me take a different tack with the Cabinet Secretary. Will she now accept the report's call to reassert parental responsibility as set out in the Education Scotland Act 1980, so that schools are not left to carry the burden alone and parents are made to feel accountable for supporting discipline and regular attendance?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Mr Kerr for his question. He and I have debated this issue on many different occasions, and he talks about parental responsibility and accountability, and he's quite right to do that. I don't view Mr Kerr's points to that end as being at odds with our national guidance. I spent the weekend, Presiding Officer, with my 5-year-old niece, so it's not just mums and dads who have a role to play here. Aunties, uncles, the extended family have a role as well in terms of teaching of behaviours. And one of the other points the report makes is that this can't always just be about the school. So we need that wider consideration of support in terms of the types of behaviours that we think are appropriate in our school. And I don't necessarily see that the reassertion of parental responsibility as being at odds with the current national guidance, so I'm happy to engage with the member on the substantive point he's made today.
Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Care experienced pupils are 6 times more likely to be excluded than others, and that's not counting informal exclusions due to part-time timetabling. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, how does that reconcile with the stated aims of the behaviour plan for a calm and consistent education, and what specific interventions will she implement to ensure care experienced young people have access to the education they deserve?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I'm conscious there's a read across with my responsibilities as Cabinet Secretary and the fact I'm recused from the promise because my wife sits on the board in terms of care experienced young people. So I will ask the Minister for Children and Young People to write directly to the member if she would be content to answer the substantive point. But more broadly, in terms of the use of those types of timetabling as features in our school, we know from school reports from the Chief Inspector there is an increasing reliance on a differentiated approach to timetabling. Now, that might be in place for lots of good reasons, but it is important that the educational needs of all children and young people, including those who are care experienced, are met. I will ask the Minister to write on the specifics of the member's question.
Miles Briggs.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary has stated that these findings come from the profession, and I agree. And one of the most concerning aspects of the findings is that the current, and this is what teachers say, current national guidance disempowers teachers. Does the Cabinet Secretary accept that and the association between falling standards, poor attendance and poor behaviour? And does she actually think that the plans the Scottish Government have set out are going to turn this around?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, look, I accept in education there will always be a range of different views on what the government of the day undertakes. But I just give the member an alternative view from Mike Corbett from the NASUWT, who has said that the guidance has the potential to support positive improvement in managing pupil behaviour in schools. We've been actively engaged in working with government to produce this guidance, and its publication is an important step forward in our continued focus on driving down levels of disruption. So, look, we have to work with our teaching trade unions in partnership. I accept there are a range of views on this issue, but I do think more broadly the teaching unions have welcomed the guidance, and it's now imperative, to the point that Mike Corbett has consistently raised with me, that the guidance informs better practice in our schools, and I'll continue to work with COSLA to that end.